Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine really complex heart surgery, but for children, specifically kids born with just a single ventricle.
Yeah, it's already incredibly challenging territory.
And then you add another layer. Some of these kids have this condition called interrupted inferior vena cava, or IIVC.
Right, which means the main vein bringing blood back from their lower body, well, it takes this unusual route up the back through the azygos vein.
And that specific anatomy, it creates a really high risk, doesn't it, for their later surgery, the Fontan procedure?
Absolutely. The Fontan, its job is to reroute all that deoxygenated blood from the body straight to the lungs. It has to bypass that single ventricle that isn't really pumping effectively to the lungs.
Okay.
But with IIVC and that azygos pathway, you've got blood coming in from different places. And it all needs to mix and then split, hopefully evenly, to both lungs.
And getting that even distribution is just like critical.
It's paramount. There's this idea of the hepatic factor.
Ah, yes, I've read about that. Something in the liver blood.
Exactly. It's thought to be something in the venous blood coming from the liver that helps keep the lung blood vessels healthy. It prevents a really nasty complication called pulmonary arteriovenous malformations, or AVMs.
AVMs, those are those abnormal connections in the lungs that bypass the oxygenation process.
That's right. And in these IIVC patients, especially if they've had an earlier stage surgery for this anatomy, the Kawashima procedure.
Which connects the upper body blood flow first, right?
Yes, exactly. The upper body blood goes to the lungs, but that lower body and liver flow is sort of waiting for the final Fontan connection. In those cases, the rate of AVMs can be, well, shockingly high. Reports say anywhere from 32% to 85%.
Wow, that's a huge range and really high.
It is. So getting that hepatic flow balance during the final Fontan surgery is absolutely key to preventing these AVMs, or even helping resolve them if they've already formed.
Okay, so you've got this unique plumbing, multiple inlets, blood from the upper body, blood from the lower body, and liver via the azygos vein, all converging, and needing to split perfectly into the two lung arteries. Why are the standard ways of doing the Fontan, like the lateral tunnel or the extracardiac conduit, why are they so difficult to get right, specifically in these IIVC kids?
Because predicting how those different streams of blood are actually going to mix and divide, it incredibly complicates.
That's not just static plumbing.
No, not at all. It's fluid dynamics.
Yeah.
And blood flow isn't constant. It changes when you exercise. It even changes significantly after you eat a meal when liver flow increases. So a connection that might look okay on paper or even seem balanced when the child is resting under anesthesia, it might completely fail to distribute that vital hepatic flow evenly when the child is just running around or after lunch.
And you're saying that even very experienced surgeons, just based on looking at the anatomy and their experience, they can't reliably predict this.
That's what the evidence suggests for these specific complex IIVC cases. Clinical experience alone, while invaluable, it just hasn't been enough to consistently nail that flow distribution prediction.
So the core problem is predictability. You can plan the surgical connection, but figuring out the flow patterns beforehand is the real hurdle.
Precisely.
Okay, but what if? What if you could build a sort of digital twin of the patient's circulation and then virtually practice the surgery, test out different connections, see how the blood would actually flow before you even make an incision?
Well, that's exactly what this research we're diving into is all about.
From JCC Advances, right?
Yes. It explores using patient-specific 3D modeling combined with something called computational fluid dynamics, CFD, to plan these exact incredibly tricky Fontan operations for kids with IIVC.
CFD, computational fluid dynamics, sounds complex.
It is, but the concept is powerful, basically using computer simulations to model fluid flow. And while using CFD for Fontan planning isn't brand new, previous work really hammered home the need for these models to be patient-specific. You can't use a generic model. Everyone's anatomy is slightly different, especially in these complex cases.
Makes sense.
This study really takes that patient-specific idea and applies it rigorously to these high-risk IIVC patients using a very defined workflow.
So how does that workflow actually start? If you have a patient, what's step one for using this tech?
It begins with really good imaging, usually cardiac MRI, sometimes CT scans. They need to get a super precise 3D picture of that child's unique heart and vessels.
Right.
Especially that whole venous return system, the superior vena cava, the azygos vein where the hepatic veins connect in, all of it.
Okay, got the detailed scans. Then what? How do you turn scans into something interactive?
That's where the 3D modeling comes in. Specialized software takes that scan data and builds a digital three-dimensional replica of the patient's relevant anatomy.
Like a CAD model for the heart.
Kinda, yeah. A patient-specific digital model of the key structures. The SVC, the area where the Fontan connection will be made, those crucial hepatic veins, the azygos, the pulmonary arteries.
And then the virtual surgery part. This is where they start manipulating that digital model.
Exactly. It's a collaborative process.
Yeah.
The cardiac surgeon and the cardiologist propose a surgical plan, maybe based on their standard approach or initial assessment.
Okay.
Then, the engineering team, using specialized software, digitally performs that surgery on the 3D model. They build the proposed Fontan connection virtually.
And the main goal of this virtual operation is?
The primary objective is to design a connection that they hypothesize will achieve balanced hepatic venous flow, getting that liver blood split evenly between the right and left lungs.
It really sounds like creating a personalized blueprint, but one you can actually test.
That's a great way to put it, a testable, personalized blueprint.
So let's talk about the testing, the CFD part. How does that simulation actually assess the virtual surgery?
Right, so CFD is the simulation engine.
Right.
Once you have the 3D model with the virtual Fontan connection built, the CFD software simulates how blood would flow through that specific reconstructed anatomy. It uses the fundamental physics of fluid dynamics equations that describe how fluids move to predict how the blood coming from the different veins will mix, and critically, how it will distribute between the two pulmonary arteries.
And this isn't just theoretical flow, right? They feed it real patient data.
Oh, absolutely. That's key for making it meaningful. They use patient-specific hemodynamic data gathered before the surgery. Things like measured blood flow rates in the superior vena cava, the combined flow from the lower body and liver coming up the azygos vein, the estimated hepatic vein contribution, pulmonary artery pressures.
Where do they get that data? Catheterization, beta marker?
Often a combination, yeah. Preoperative cardiac catheterization and phase contrast MRI are common sources. These measurements become the boundary conditions for the simulation.
Boundary conditions, like telling the simulation how much blood is coming in and what the pressure is like downstream.
Exactly. It sets the stage for the simulation. They even incorporate more detailed flow information, like how flow changes over a heartbeat cycle, phasic flow data from MRI, which helps account for some effects of breathing, too.
Okay, now here's the part I found really fascinating, and it addresses that issue you mentioned earlier about flow changing.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just simulate one condition, like the patient being asleep for the MRI. They simulated multiple physiological states. Why is that such a big deal?
It's a huge leap forward in realism and robustness testing. Because, like we said, kids aren't always anesthetized and lying flat.
Right. They run, they play, they eat.
Exactly. So this study simulated, I believe, 4 key states. The anesthetized state, matching the conditions when some data was acquired. A baseline resting state, like normal daily lives. A postprandial state, after eating, when liver blood flow naturally increases significantly. And an exercise state, where overall blood flow ramps up.
And simulating all those that tests if the surgical plan holds up.
Precisely. It tests the robustness of the proposed surgical connection. Will it maintain that crucial balanced hepatic flow distribution, not just at rest, but also when the demands change, when liver flow triples after a meal, when overall flow doubles during activity? That's the million-dollar question that standard pre-op assessments just can't answer.
That makes so much sense. You need a design that works reliably across real-life conditions. So in these complex simulations, how do they actually measure if that hepatic flow is balanced?
They use a clever technique involving virtual particles. They seed massless particles at the virtual inlets where the hepatic veins drain into the Fontan pathway.
Like tiny digital tracers.
Exactly. The CFD simulation then tracks where these particles go. It calculates how many end up in the right pulmonary artery versus the left pulmonary artery. This gives them a very precise percentage split of the hepatic flow.
Very cool.
They also calculate other things like power loss. You want the connection to be efficient, minimal energy loss as the blood flows through. Low power loss is generally a sign of favorable flow dynamics.
Okay, so the team takes the surgeon's initial idea, builds it virtually, runs these sophisticated CFD simulations across these different states, and I suspect the first try wasn't always the winner.
Not even close, apparently. This is one of the most striking findings in the paper. For every single one of the 4 patients they evaluated prospectively using this whole workflow.
Yeah.
The initial surgical plan, the one proposed by the experienced clinical team based on standard assessment, did not achieve acceptable hepatic venous flow balance according to the CFD predictions.
Wow. Every single one. That's significant.
It really underscores the challenge. It shows this isn't just about confirming intuition. The modeling is actively revealing potential problems that weren't obvious.
So it must be an iterative process then. Simulation says, nope, try again.
Exactly. That's the core of the workflow's value.
Yeah.
The simulation results showing unbalanced flow or maybe high power loss in one state go back to the team.
The surgeon, cardiologist, engineers.
Right. They review the flow patterns, figure out why it's not working as desired, and then they modify the virtual surgery. Maybe they change the angle of a connection, the size of the conduit, add a baffle, propose a shunt.
And then run the simulations all over again.
Yes. They repeat the CFD analysis across all the physiological states with the modified design. And they keep iterating, modifying, simulating, analyzing until they arrive at a design that the simulations predict will provide robust, balanced hepatic flow across all tested conditions.
The paper mentioned one patient needed analysis of 4 different surgical approaches and over 80 simulations. That's incredible dedication.
It really highlights the complexity. The anatomical variability between these IIVC patients is huge, and the fluid dynamics are sensitive. It takes that level of detailed, iterative analysis to really overcome the limits of just looking at the anatomy.
Okay, so after all that intense modeling, simulation, back and forth refinement, what happened when they actually applied these optimized plans to the 4 patients in the study? Did it work?
The main finding was yes. This iterative CFD workflow successfully led to a surgical plan that was predicted to achieve balanced hepatic flow in all 4 of those prospectively studied patients.
Can you walk us through an example? Maybe patient P1.
Sure. Patient P1 is a good illustration. The simulation of a standard Fontan design for this patient predicted that basically 100% of the hepatic venous flow would stream just to the left lung.
Which is bad news for the right lung, potential for AVMs there.
Exactly. So based on that modeling result, the actual surgical plan was changed. They decided to incorporate a specific modification called a hepatozygote shunt, connecting the hepatic vein consolants more directly towards the right lung.
Okay.
The simulations predicted this specific shunt design would achieve robust balance across conditions. And that modified operation, guided by the modeling, is what the patient successfully underwent.
And patient P2 sounds like an even tougher case or revision, someone who already had AVMs.
Yes. Patient P2 was complex, already had AVMs in the left lung after a previous Fontan attempt. The preoperative simulation confirmed why. 100% of her hepatic flow was going to the right lung, starving the left lung.
Okay, so they needed to rebalance it.
Right. They modeled several options for her revision surgery. Just adding a simple shunt, like in P1, wasn't predicted to provide stable balance across all the flow states for her specific anatomy.
So what did the modeling suggest?
The simulation predicted that a more complex solution was needed, combining a hepatozygote shunt with a surgical creation of an innominate vein.
Treating a vein.
Essentially, yes. Surgically constructing a pathway to help route the superior vena cava flow correctly within her complex anatomy, which in turn allowed the shunt to effectively balance the hepatic flow. The modeling showed this combination would finally achieve stable, balanced flow across resting, exercise, and postprandial states.
And that simulation-guided, more complex surgery was performed.
Yes, and successfully.
It really hammers home that key finding, doesn't it? In every single patient, the plan changed substantially based on the modeling.
It does. It's compelling evidence that for these IIVC anatomies, the complex interplay of anatomy and flow dynamics is just too difficult to predict accurately with clinical assessment alone. The computational modeling provides that missing predictive insight.
Okay, they have these optimized plans based on simulations, but the ultimate test is reality. How did they check if the predictions actually matched what happened after the surgery?
Validation is crucial, absolutely. They used postoperative MRI scans to look at the blood flow distribution in the patients after they had recovered from the surgery.
Can MRI track those hepatic flow particles directly?
Not yet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Current clinical MRI can't quite track the origin of flow particles like the simulation can. But what they could measure very accurately with MRI is the overall proportion of blood flow going to the right pulmonary artery versus the left pulmonary artery.
So they compared the total flow split predicted by CSD with the total flow split measured by MRI post-op.
Exactly. They looked at the overall right-left pulmonary artery flow balance.
And how did they compare? Was the simulation close?
Remarkably close. The paper reports that the CFD models, preoperatively, predicted an average right-left pulmonary artery flow balance of about 51% to 49%, plus or minus a small margin of error.
Okay, almost perfectly balanced.
Yes, and the postoperative MRI measurements found an actual flow balance of 49% to 51%, again with a small margin. The authors highlighted the excellent congruence between the prediction and the measurement. Essentially, no significant difference.
Wow. That's really strong validation for the modeling approach.
It really is. It suggests the simulations are doing a very good job of capturing the essential flow physics in these complex reconstructions.
What about the clinical outcomes? Did the patients do well, especially the ones like P2 who had AVMs beforehand?
The clinical outcomes reported were generally positive. In the revision patients who started with AVMs, they saw improvements in their oxygen saturation levels.
That's great.
And importantly, improvement or even resolution of the AVMs themselves was noted. For patient P2, the one with a very complex revision, they saw improvement in the local oxygen levels related to the AVMs, although her overall body saturation was still impacted by a different rare condition involving the liver and systemic veins called Abernethy syndrome, which was diagnosed later.
Okay, so the Fontan circulation itself was improved even if another condition affected the overall picture.
That seems to be the case. And the power loss predictions from the CFD models were also low across the board for the final surgical designs, which is what you want for an efficient Fontan circulation long term.
So let's pull this all together. What's the big takeaway? So what from this study?
I think the major significance is that it demonstrates quite convincingly that using these patient-specific 3D models combined with multi-state CFD analysis is a powerful and now validated tool. It can predict that crucial hepatic venous flow distribution and really help optimize the surgical plan specifically for these incredibly challenging IVC Fontan patients.
And the implication is that this kind of detailed pre-planning might help surgeons avoid that harmful hepatic flow maldistribution,
Right.
and potentially prevent those devastating AVMs from developing down the road.
That's the hope and the goal. It offers a pathway to move beyond the inherent limitations of clinical assessment alone in these uniquely complex anatomical situations. It enables a truly personalized, prediction-driven surgical strategy.
And it's practical, too. You mentioned the study notes. They actually display the 3D model of the final chosen surgical plan on a screen in the operating room.
Yes, which is fascinating. The virtual plan becomes a direct visual guide for the surgeon during the actual physical procedure, a tangible link between the simulation and the surgery.
Now, as promising as this all sounds, no study is perfect. The authors mentioned some limitations, didn't they?
They did, responsibly so. It's still a relatively small number of patients, just 4 evaluated prospectively with this full iterative workflow. That's the main limitation. Also, while the models are sophisticated, they don't yet capture everything. Things like the full dynamic effects of breathing throughout the respiratory cycle or the effects of gravity when the patient is upright are still difficult to incorporate perfectly. Though using that phasic flow data from MRI does help account for some breathing-related flow variations.
Understood. And what about the future? Where does this technology go next?
Well, the researchers are looking to refine the models further, maybe develop better scaling factors to represent those different physiological states even more accurately. There's also a big hope, technologically, for advancements in MRI that might one day allow clinicians to directly measure hepatic venous flow distribution to each lung non-invasively. That would be amazing for validation and follow-up.
Like seeing those virtual particles in real life.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, there's still a need to better understand the biology, like what is the minimum amount or percentage of hepatic flow that's actually needed in each lung segment to prevent AVMs from forming? The modeling helps achieve balance, but defining the precise target is still an area of research.
So wrapping this up for everyone listening, what this deep dive really shows is how truly cutting-edge technology blending medical imaging, advanced engineering simulation, and hands-on surgical skill is being used right now. It's tackling some of the most complex, life-altering surgeries imaginable, specifically for some very vulnerable children.
It represents a potential shift, doesn't it? Moving beyond relying solely on experience and anatomical visualization, crucial as they are, towards creating this personalized, tested blueprint before surgery.
A blueprint designed to optimize something as fundamental as blood flow patterns.
Exactly, aiming to directly improve the odds of a better long-term outcome by getting that flow right from the start.
And the fact that the simulations predicted the real-world flow patterns so closely after surgery, that's just incredibly compelling validation, I think.
It really builds confidence in the approach.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. If these detailed computational models can be so effective in refining complex heart surgery, predicting and optimizing blood flow in situations where standard approaches reach their limits, where else could this type of thing be applied?
Good question.
Where else could patient-specific pre-procedure simulation fundamentally change how we plan and perform medical interventions? What other complex procedures could become safer or more tailored or more effective if we could virtually practice and optimize them first?
It certainly opens up possibilities across many areas of medicine and surgery. A glimpse into the future of personalized predictive healthcare.
Definitely something to think about. You're now well informed on the power and the potential of computational fluid dynamics in the world of complex cardiac surgery.